The Circleville Letters were like a dark cloud that settled over the small town of Circleville, Ohio, in the late 1970s. What started as anonymous letters soon turned into a years-long campaign of terror that shook the community to its core. The letters were filled with accusations, threats, and secrets, some true, some false, but all deeply unsettling. No one was safe from the wrath of the Circleville letter writer, and the mystery that began with a few carefully penned words would only deepen with time. Mary Gillespie was the first target. In 1976, she began receiving letters that accused her of having an affair with Gordon Massey, the local school superintendent. The letters were explicit, filled with details that suggested the writer was someone who knew Mary personally and was watching her every move. They warned her to stop the affair or face the consequences. Mary denied the affair and tried to ignore the letters, but they kept coming, growing more threatening and more insistent. The writer knew intimate details of her life, where she lived, where she worked, and even her children's routines. Mary was terrified, but didn't tell many people about the letters at first. She confided only in her husband, Ron Gillespie, and a few close friends. They tried to keep the situation quiet, hoping that the writer would lose interest and go away, but the letters continued to flood in. It wasn't just Mary who was receiving them anymore. Her friends, neighbors, and even strangers were getting letters that spread gossip and lies. The letters accused people of infidelity, embezzlement, and all manner of sins. No one knew who was next on the writer's hit list, and no one knew who to trust. One day, Ron received a letter of his own, warning him to stop his wife or else. The words were menacing, and Ron, like Mary, began to feel the crushing weight of the invisible stalker who seemed to be always watching. Tensions escalated in the Gillespie household, and the fear of what might happen next consumed them both. On the night of August 19, 1977, Ron received a phone call that seemed to be the last straw. The details of that call remain a mystery, but whatever was said sent Ron into a rage. He grabbed his gun and stormed out of the house, telling Mary he was going to confront whoever was behind the letters. Not long after, Ron's truck was found crashed into a tree, and he was dead. There were no witnesses, and the police ruled the crash an accident, but the circumstances were suspicious. Ron's gun had been fired once, though no bullet was found, and his blood alcohol level was found to be high, which Mary insisted was uncharacteristic of her husband. Ron's death only fueled the fear and speculation around the letters. The writer seemed to take credit, boasting in subsequent letters that they had taken action against Ron. The whole town was on edge, not knowing if Ron's death was a tragic accident or something much darker. Mary, grieving and still under the constant barrage of letters, became more determined than ever to uncover the writer's identity, but the clues were sparse. Whoever the writer was, they were careful and cunning. Months turned into years and the letters kept coming. Despite efforts by the police, private investigators, and even handwriting experts, the identity of the writer remained elusive. Suspicion fell on many people in town, but none more so than Paul Freshour, Mary's brother-in-law. Paul was a quiet, unassuming man, but there were tensions between him and Mary. Some believed Paul had reasons to hold a grudge and might be capable of such a twisted campaign. In 1983, Mary was driving along her usual bus route when she noticed a sign along the road that was aimed at her daughter. The sign contained a crude and nasty accusation, and in a fit of rage, Mary stopped the bus and tried to tear it down. But as she removed the sign, she found a string attached to it, leading to a small box that was crudely fashioned into a booby trap. Inside was a gun rigged to fire if the sign was tampered with. Mary was horrified. The trap was poorly constructed, and fortunately it didn't go off, but the message was clear. The writer was willing to escalate from threats to violence. The gun inside the trap was traced back to Paul Freshour. Despite his protests of innocence, Paul was arrested and brought to trial. The prosecution argued that Paul had set up the booby trap to kill Mary and that he was, in fact, the Circleville letter writer. Paul denied everything, claiming he had been framed, but the evidence against him was compelling. Witnesses testified that Paul's handwriting matched the letters, and the jury found him guilty of attempted murder. He was sentenced to prison, and the town breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing that the nightmare was finally over. But the letters didn't stop. Even with Paul behind bars, new letters continued to arrive, taunting the police, the residents, and even Paul himself. The letters mocked the justice system and pointed out that the real writer was still free. It was as if the writer was playing a game with the entire town, and no one knew the rules. Paul continued to maintain his innocence, insisting that he was being set up, and the fact that the letters persisted while he was incarcerated only added to the mystery. Paul's conviction did little to stop the spread of rumors and fear in Circleville. The letters continued sporadically over the next decade, each one as unsettling as the last. Paul was eventually released from prison in 1994, still maintaining that he was not the letter writer and that he had been wrongly accused. The town, weary and scarred by years of harassment, was left with more questions than answers. Even today, the mystery of the Circleville letters remains unsolved. The letters stopped as suddenly and inexplicably as they began, leaving behind a trail of broken trust, shattered lives, and unanswered questions. Circleville would never be the same. The writer's identity, motive, and methods remain shrouded in secrecy, and the letters themselves are a chilling reminder of how deeply fear can root itself in a community. Some believe the writer was someone close to the Gillespie family. Others think it was an elaborate conspiracy that went far beyond one person, but no one knows for sure. The legacy of the Circleville letters is not just a tale of small-town intrigue, but a sobering lesson in the power of words and the devastation that can follow when anonymity is wielded as a weapon. To this day, the specter of the letters lingers, a reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers are the ones you cannot see. After Paul Freshour's release, he continued to fight to clear his name, pursuing appeals, and even appearing on national television to tell his side of the story. He insisted that he was not the letter writer, that he had been set up, and that the real culprit was still out there, perhaps still living among them. Paul's story gained traction when investigative journalists and TV shows, including Unsolved Mysteries, picked up the case. New theories emerged, each more sensational than the last, ranging from the plausible to the bizarre. Some speculated that Paul had been framed by law enforcement, possibly as part of a larger cover-up involving powerful people in Circleville. Others believed that the letters were the work of multiple individuals, each with their own grudges and motives, who had somehow conspired to continue the torment even after Paul was imprisoned. The truth, however, remained maddeningly out of reach. One of the most haunting aspects of the case was the writer's uncanny ability to know so much about the townspeople. The letters weren't random. They were precise, targeting specific individuals with specific details, some of which were deeply personal and known only to a few. This led to the unsettling realization that the writer was not just an observer, but someone embedded within the community, someone who knew their secrets and movements. The suspicion that it could be anyone, a neighbor, a friend, a colleague, fueled paranoia and distrust. Mary Gillespie, whose life had been upended by the letters, tried to move on, but she could never truly escape the shadow of what had happened. For years, she continued to deny the affair with Gordon Massey, insisting that the writer's accusations were lies designed to ruin her. Her children, who had grown up under the constant fear of being watched, carried the trauma with them into adulthood. The Gillespie family, like so many others in Circleville, was forever changed. The case's bizarre twists and unanswered questions drew in amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts, each trying to piece together the puzzle that the police had failed to solve. One particularly persistent theory was that Paul's estranged wife, Karen Sue Freshour, might have been involved. Karen and Paul's divorce had been bitter, and some speculated that she had orchestrated the letter-writing campaign as revenge, using her knowledge of Paul's handwriting and access to his belongings to frame him. However, this theory, like all the others, remains speculative, with no concrete evidence to prove it. Despite Paul's insistence that he was innocent, the truth about the gun used in the booby trap remained a key piece of evidence against him. The gun was undeniably his, but Paul claimed it had been stolen before the trap was discovered. He pointed out that he had reported the theft to the police, but this was never fully investigated. The handwriting analysis used to convict Paul was also called into question, with experts arguing that it was not a foolproof method of identification. The credibility of the entire investigation was undermined by these inconsistencies, leaving many to wonder if the real letter writer had played a far more complex game than anyone had realized. Years after his release, Paul Freshour died, taking with him whatever secrets he may have had about the letters and his own involvement, or lack thereof. The town moved on, and the letters became a dark chapter in Circleville's history, whispered about but never truly resolved. For many, it was easier to believe that the letters were the work of a disturbed individual who was now gone. But for those who lived through it, the fear that the writer could strike again never completely disappeared. The Circleville Letters left an indelible mark on the town, not just because of the letters themselves, but because of the questions they raised about trust, community, and the power of fear. The case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of secrets and the ease with which someone could exploit them. It also highlighted the flaws in the justice system, where circumstantial evidence and community hysteria could convict a man who, even after serving his sentence, maintained his innocence to his dying day. In the end, the true identity of the Circleville letter writer remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in American true crime history. The letters are a haunting reminder that sometimes evil does not wear a recognizable face. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, cloaked in the guise of everyday life.